We are so afraid of what society will say, or our peers, or our family. They have expectations towards us, but they stay somebody else's expectations until we choose to sign under them.
Kristina, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and a pleasure.
And as I shared before we started recording, I've been reading your book and enjoying it very, very much. And so today I would love to, in addition to sharing with our watchers and listeners your story, the story of the book, I would love to have a wide-ranging conversation about human imperfections and authenticity. And to kick that conversation off, maybe you can talk a little bit about your background and your recent work here with the book, and just catch our audience up to speed with who you are and what you do.
So my imperfect background, I think I'll give the official bio-style background first. I'm a co-founder of Mindvalley, which is one of the world's biggest educational platforms in personal growth and transformation. But that's just the official part of it. Actually, as I said, my background is a little bit imperfect. I was born in a country which doesn't exist anymore. Born and raised in a country which doesn't exist anymore, and actually brainwashed into ideology which is also not up to date anymore. I was born in Soviet Union, and I was 14 when it collapsed. So pretty much my personality was formed in that very idealistic and restrictive society. And considering that now I'm an entrepreneur, and also I'm a co-founder of the business which is in personal growth and transformation, these two things were not part of my reality when I was growing up. Entrepreneurship was illegal. It was actually punished by law. You would end up in jail, and personal growth was just frowned upon. It was something nobody would be doing things like that. It's just not practical. So the fact that I ended up in this industry is a little bit of a chance, a little bit of a I do not know, maybe just me going with the flow. I started my career in Estonia in the government. I made my career really fast, partially because Estonia was going through a transformative period, and the country needed new blood. Being a young person, I made my career super fast. And then I decided to do what I thought a young girl is supposed to do. I got married and followed my husband into a completely new world. I lived in New York as during my first year of marriage, and there everything turned around. I had to start everything from scratch pretty much, and that's how I ended up co-founding Mindvalley. I wasn't allowed to do anything else. My career was, I ended it because it was Estonian government, which was a bit useless in US. And the best thing I could do was to help my then husband, Vishen, who is the founder of Mindvalley, to help him with his startup. And that's the beginning of the journey. And then since then, it's been 20 years now. Personal growth and transformation has become part of my life.
Exactly. I feel like there's a reasonable question when we hear this idea of personal growth and transformation. I'm obviously a huge advocate. Those are, part of the founding sort of principles and the vision for the show, and so much about me and my career as not dissimilar to yours. I'm curious about this, how do we reconcile the idea that, that we are whole and complete, and there is sort of nothing wrong with us? How do we reconcile that, the ability just to be in our own skin, with this desire for change and for growth? And, those are seemingly competitive orientations. And, this is an age-old question, but I'm curious how you would approach something like that. Help me understand it.
It's a very deep question that will require probably a very deep dive into this whole thing, but I would give it surprisingly, or maybe unexpectedly simple answer. So when I live in Europe, I'm in Europe right now, and if I were to go to Paris, I could sit in my car and put in Paris in my navigation system and start driving, but the navigation will not switch on until it finds out where I'm starting from. So that's how it works for me. Yes, we want to change, we want to grow, we want to become better, but it can't start from a random point somewhere in the, in air. It has to start from the point A. Your journey always begins with point A and then goes to point B, and probably it's a winding journey. So self-acceptance for me is not contradictory to the desire to change something. You can actually feel at peace with what you have, and with that contentment, know that you can become something else, or you maybe can become more of what you are. Because who says that your growth and your strength comes from eradicating things that you don't like about yourself? Maybe it's not necessarily this way. So the point is that being at peace with yourself, or being present with yourself, is not a contradictory desire from wanting to change something. And as I said, it is a fairly deep concept, and it might require some nuances to catch. And on the surface, it seems kind of contradictory. And that's actually one of the diseases of our contemporary society. We like to stay on the surface. We don't like going deep. There's even research, which is probably 10 years old, if not older, that says that contemporary people are not capable of holding huge amounts of information. So books are out of fashion because people prefer, microdosing. And I mean in terms of information, not in terms of psychedelics. But that's a huge problem. We stay on the surface, we stay on the facade level, but the essence of things happens when you are ready to dive deep.
Well, clearly, with your childhood, right, you have had to do a lot of personal excavation, being, as you started you opened the show with, rather, that, so much of your original identity, even the identity of, as you said, as a girl should get married, like these things have radically transformed across your life already. So how did what was the toehold? What was the thing that gave you, an insight that this was possible, especially given your background when I'm sure there was some sort of conflict from a human perspective. You could feel these things, and yet, all of these external influences were signaling to you that change wasn't not permitted, wasn't possible, or wasn't respected or appreciated or idealized. How did you even start? Because right now there's someone listening that maybe it's not because they were born into a foreign country that doesn't exist anymore, but because all these influences around them, are there's seeds of doubt, and it's a curiosity of their identity with who they have been versus who they can be tomorrow.
Well, my answer would be two phrases. One of them is ignorance bliss. The other one is the leap of faith. I do want to put you guys at ease, at peace. Surviving the fall of Soviet Union wasn't a very traumatic experience for me, maybe because I was a teenager, and that's that time in life where we are discovering life. So it was not a shock for my system, although it was a shock for a lot of people who were a little older than me, because at that age, you're just wired to discover and to realize that the world is maybe not what you thought it was. Now, when it comes to the essence of your question, then it is very, the one thought that I had was that it's not that who you are to become is different from what you are. You are that thing or that person, that creature. It's just that very often by the age of, 30, 40, 50, we build so many layers around that true essence that we forget what that person really is. So I think what I'm trying to drive people at is not that you have to become someone else. You have to first learn to be yourself. And then that opens the door for you to become someone else, to change your life. And it's such a curious process, because we are often afraid to go into what we are, because we are enamored with the idea of what we could be. Since you've read the book, you know this analogy: when we fall in love with someone else, we fall in love with an idea. We don't fall in love with the real person. And when time passes and we start seeing person for what they are, we have a choice. Are we going to love the real person? Are we going to be disillusioned? The same true is with us. And especially with people who come to personal growth and transformation, who are interested in growing and becoming better. They're very often so enamored with that idea of aspiration, of what I could be, that facing the real person, the reality, is just becomes unbearable. The bigger the gap, the harder it is to do that. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to find courage and face that real you, because once you've faced that real you, that will truly open the doors for you to become something so much bigger. But while you refuse to do that, you might be going in the very wrong direction and depriving yourself of a lot of power.
So let's ask a reasonably big question to get us in a little bit deeper into the material, because as you said, our culture is obsessed, or either maybe obsessed is the wrong word, but comfortable with the surface. And right now, you have gone through this. You've shared it at length in your book, Becoming Flawesome, and in courses that you've created, for example, and share with your community. But right now, there's someone again who's listening, and what is a sort of a litmus test, if you would, or how did you come to discover or become aware that you needed change, that you wanted something different than you were experiencing? Like, what's the litmus test for people who are listening right now? Because again, we're so easily just like, oh yeah, I'm fine. Or, in the book you talk about, like, how are the kids doing? Oh, the kids are fine. Like there's we have these superficial questions, and more when I talk to people, they're not so aware that something is horribly wrong, but there's this uneasy feeling in them. And so I'm wondering, maybe if you could share how you discover this about yourself, or if you could give some advice to others who are to the listeners right now, the community, like, if X is happening, then you might want to think about why.
Well, I'll give my story, and I'll give some advice as well. But I would want to start with an idea that if you have the question, usually if you have this weird feeling that something is not fine, that's the answer to the question that you just haven't asked yourself yet. Very often we have the answer, and the question comes a little later because the answer is already there. But now my story was probably a Freudian slip, and I start my book with that. It was a very bizarre experience where I was traveling, and when I came back to the office, my friend said that she missed me, and I replied without a stop, I missed me too. And that phrase was so out of place and so strange and so weird that started me on the journey of trying to find out what did I just say and why did I say that. But that was, in a way, a lucky chance, because it was just such a out of pattern, experience that it made me think. Now, for people, usually how it shows itself is when you start feeling that what you're feeling is not right. You start judging yourself that what you're doing is not right. So a very simple scenario would be this, and it's my scenario as well, midlife crisis. You live your life by the book, you do all the right things, you check all the right boxes, and you have made it. And whatever that age is, you have made it, you have done what you thought. And of course, we have little things in our life that irritate us. But if we sit down and do it in a good state of mind, we are like, yeah, actually, my life is fine. I'm successful. Exactly what you're talking about. A lot of people, when they're listening to podcasts, they're in that mode because they're doing something good. We feel good about ourselves when we do something good. So you reach that point and you think that, and people tell you your life is an inspiration or you are an inspiration, but you don't feel maybe as happy or fulfilled, and you think that something is missing. It's this crippling little feeling, which is not really a depression or anxiety, but it's something strange. And this is half the problem. The real problem is when you start feeling guilty for that. I shouldn't be feeling like that. How dare I? Why do I feel, for example, uninspired with my partner? I love my partner. I'm faithful to them. Or why do I feel burdened by my kids, or jaded at my work, the thing that I love? All those things that you feel that you shouldn't be feeling because actually you've done everything right. This is usually a very clear mark that you have got lost somewhere and you're not really in touch with yourself. And I know it sounds so fluffy, in touch with yourself, but we don't pause to ask ourselves, why do I feel the way I do? We brush it off, we move on, we keep ourselves busy doing other things rather than dealing with the big things. We all have big questions. Sometimes they're so overwhelming that rather than dealing with my own mess, it's much easier to dive into work, get stressed there, get anxiety there, and say, I don't have time for everything else.
What I hear with that response is it's sort of, if you're wondering how you're feeling, then that is a signal. If there's a sort of any sort of distance between the event and the observing of the event, you're like it's almost like a judgment that is a reason to excavate or dig deeper or look closer. And what is your sense, if let's just assume that we are aware that we are in this predicament, it takes some sort of courage to decide to pick at that, right? To look under the covers, because it's very inconvenient when you have to start working on your life amidst all of the other living of life's, ups and downs. And, in your story, you recount in the book that, as you said, when you came back from that trip, you asked that question, and then it became something that was, in your consciousness, and you had to start exploring it. What was that process like? What was it like to begin, looking under the covers, picking at your, the relationship that you had to yourself, and, I would just call it your judgment of your level of authenticity?
It's you said the right thing, a lot of right things, obviously. There, the whole thing is right. But what I want to say is that everything starts with awareness, and there are definitely other scenarios as well where people are so busy that they're not even aware that they're living some scenario which is not going to make them happy at the end of the day. But that's not really the people that I can talk to, because I believe in free will, and I think usually if you start asking questions, then probably you are ready for the journey. So the question is not whether you're lost, but are you ready for the journey back to yourself? And by no means am I trying to say that everybody is lost, but my experience in years have showed that a lot of the people who are most lost are not aware of it, because that's the nature of delusion. You are not aware of your delusion. Once you're aware of it, it stops being delusion. It becomes your problem to solve. Now, and yes, it does require courage. And that's the first thing we go to, because we think, it's this leap of faith. It's this step out of the airplane door with a parachute when you don't know what's down there. But it's not courage that saves you in that journey. It's the kindness. And that's what makes a huge difference. You don't even need that much courage once you have kindness. And this is such an undervalued skill, because kindness actually opens the door to the biggest courage. And let me explain what I mean. If you know that you can still be kind to yourself and love yourself, even if you're flawed, imperfect, if you fail, then you actually find the courage to go and challenge yourself. And that's something which we don't understand. We sometimes think it's the reverse, that, but if I'm too nice to myself, am I not going to be just complacent? No, you're complacent because you're scared. We as a society function on two really horrible myths, that people are by nature stupid and lazy, and it's not true. We're neither stupid nor are we lazy. We're very often just overwhelmed, burnt out, exhausted, and wounded. And that's why we do the silly stuff. And if you just trust a little bit yourself, you will discover, like a very simple example. Have you been like on a holiday, week-long holiday somewhere on a beach, paradise location? The first day you enjoy it, you're savoring it. The second day, by day 5, you're like, when am I coming back to the office?
Yeah.
And I think if we just learned to trust ourselves, and nobody teaches us to trust ourselves, nobody. My industry doesn't do that. We also say, well, let me fix you. Entertainment doesn't do that. News don't do that. Nothing. Marketing doesn't do that. We are told not to trust ourselves.
So how do we begin to trust ourselves? To me, this is like one of the most fascinating questions. It's been I've been on this quest for so long. We have all this wisdom inside us, this thing that we're told not to trust, this intuition, these gut feelings. There's starting to be science that sort of acknowledges that all these different experiences are stored in the body, and we have to begin to listen. But how do we find our truth when we've got all these competing? You talked about marketing and entertainment and news and your grandparents and your mother who's judging you and your peers and your boss. And these are all external influences, right? That are critics. Yeah. And so how do we, in the face of all of that external noise, start to find our own truth? How did you do it? And again, give us some advice on how we ought to do it.
I'll have to like unwind that question, and I hope I don't lose my thought somewhere in the middle because I'm prone to ranting. but I think the core principle is that there is one very important relationship in your life, and that's relationship with yourself. We have a lot of relationships, and relationships in general have some similar rules. Relationships usually require some time. Trust requires time to build trust. If you think of building trust with someone else, you require some time. You need to have this dance a little bit, like, let me see, can I trust you? Can I not? Back and forth. And then after a while, that feedback tells you that, yes, I can trust that person. So when it comes to trusting yourself, just by analogy with the relationship, it will require some time, because the relationship that you have with yourself right now has been built over all this long time. And just like any other relationship requires commitment. It requires presence. It requires some kind of compassion, even for yourself. Relationship with your lover, with your child, with your colleagues, all of them require all those things. And if you work on them or not, I don't like the word work because it's so heavy, but let's say if you are committed to them, if you value them, if you pay attention to them, if you prioritize the relationships, they start flourishing. Normally, that's the nature of relationships. If you take a relationship by default, that person is always in my house, no matter what I say, oh yes, we fought, never mind, we'll be good again, then they usually start deteriorating. And at some point they can fail. So it's the same is true with us. The problem with us is that we deprioritize our relationship with ourselves for many reasons, partially because we think that I call it self-love because it's a little bit in your face and it's a little bit jarring. But in essence, we are afraid of that. We think if I prioritize myself or my relationship with myself, people will think that I'm selfish, that I'm self-obsessed, and all those horrible things. So first of all, we're afraid to admit that it is important for me. My relationship with myself is important for me. And another thing is that we don't understand how it works. What is self-love? Is your obsession with being approved or approval from outside, is that about self-love? Is your desire to have boundaries and to be comfortable, is that about being selfish? All these things are so undiscussed and not normalized that rather than digging into that, we just push it to the side and say, no, find meaning, help other people. That's more important. Now, I've something I haven't shared with the audience. I've dedicated the first 10 or maybe even 20 years of my life to charity. I've worked with some of the most marginalized society in the world, in Asia, in South America. And I can tell you one thing. You're much more useful to the world if you are fine. It's like in the airplane. You have to put on your mask first. So that's, in essence, one of the nice and palatable ways of running away from the big problem, the problem of you abandoning yourself and betraying yourself. And that's really the essence of that work. Now, if you find courage to prioritize your relationship with yourself, be present, committed to yourself, be kind to yourself, compassionate, then the trust will come sooner or later. But it will take some time to build. Because however old you are, I'm 45 years of building that relationship, and most of that time messing up big time.
Well, this is so refreshing for you to share that, that you've had a difficult journey. You mentioned 45 years in relationship with yourself, and it sort of doesn't matter, right? Where it's sort of like in the same way, wherever you are or wherever you find yourself, that's where you are, and you have to start there. And I'm trying to frame this for our listeners, like, because right now there's someone who's lamenting or is sad at how long they have not been in a healthy relationship with themselves, for however, they've been betraying themselves, and it seems like one of the first things that we have to do is get over that, because that is a barrier that seems to me to keep so many people from that first sort of acceptance. There's this like lamenting, and the way I talk about it is no effort is ever wasted. Nothing. Even if you put in years of effort and it was down a path that seems like the wrong path, you valued other people more than yourself, or you did things that were harmful to yourself or the people you love, at some point that actually became the most useful thing, because it brought you to now. It brought you to where you are, where you're willing to start the work, to start the self-care, to start the self-love, or whatever it is that, and so I'm wondering, you sort of jested a little bit. It seemed like, I'm 45 years old, and, so much of those years are screwing up the relationship that I have with myself. I'm wondering if you can, through your own experiences, maybe share something that helps people understand how you became aware of this requirement for change.
Well, the easy first step is just show yourself some kindness. Real kindness, like profound kindness. It's like with anyone, you find that abandoned kitten on the street and you just give it a hug, and then you'll wash it and feed it and whatnot. So maybe the hug is the first thing that you need to give yourself. Now, coming to my story, a few times I've been asked that question: what advice would I give myself, my younger self? And every time I think about it, I come to the same conclusion: I wouldn't.
Say more.
Because then I could have messed up this journey and ended up somewhere else. So the thing that helped me was, I had one really turbulent, emotionally very turbulent period in my life. I self-diagnosed anxiety and whatnot. And what helped me move on from that period were, first the quote, which I'm constantly misquoting, by Viktor Frankl, who says, "Pain stops being suffering once it finds meaning." So I remember thinking about myself and thinking, how did I allow myself to suffer for such a long time? And then when I realized that had brought me to, or giving me the experience that I needed to do certain things in my life, or to become a certain person in my life, I was at peace with that painful period of my life, because I realized that it was a necessary price for that kind of journey. And I'm not saying, by the way, by no means am I saying that all the transformation requires any pain. No, but if you've had pain in your life, there is a way to turn it to your advantage, no matter what the pain, even if the pain doesn't have a silver lining, or, we're also enamored by this idea: what doesn't kill you makes you strong. It's not true, or that everything comes for a reason. Everything doesn't come for a reason. There's a lot of buzz out there, which is not necessary. But what is important is that you can make a choice. Coming back to the same Viktor Frankl, he was writing his book, Men in Search for Meaning, is written about people who survived the Nazi concentration camps or didn't survive. And he says that even in those circumstances, when you think that you have no choice whatsoever, you always have a choice. And it is the choice that you make that defined whether you would survive it or not. So if even he, in this kind of circumstances, says you always have a choice, then it is truly always in our hands to choose. And that actually brings me back to one of the comments you said, that, we are so afraid of what society will say, or our peers, or our family. They have expectations towards us, but they stay somebody else's expectations. until we choose to sign under them. So I know I've lived for 16 years in Malaysia. I know there are some more restrictive societies. But even in those circumstances, you always have a choice. And pretty much, no matter how restrictive the society is, it's your choice to follow the expectations of society, of your family, of your children, of your peers, and make them your own choice and your own expectations, or to actually say, this is not about me.
This is a major step, right? The ability to distance those voices that are in your head that you feel like they certainly started out of someone else's and they have become your own. You have to be able to put a little awareness on them and ask yourself, is this really me? And when you begin to understand through self-love, compassion, these things that you're talking about, self-care, that recognize that those aren't you. And it's sort of, there's this freedom that I became very clear in reading the book about your story when you sort of start to unlock these things. And I think this is what people miss. They miss this, some sort of a, it seems like there's an unlock. There's a moment where you finally, maybe it's just once, just a little bit of trust. You trust yourself, you listen to your intuition. And if once you do it once, it becomes 1% easier. And, then you do it again. And there's this sort of a momentum that builds in starting to trust yourself and starting to believe and listen. And again, you mentioned through self-care. But then there's this thing that crops up, and it's perfectionism. Right? we start to then we get a little momentum, and that's when the voices of self-doubt, when they see progress, they get louder. And then they said, "Oh, well, gosh, you're supposed to be perfect." And boy, wouldn't it be scary if someone else found out, a therapist, a husband, a partner, a peer, a friend, that you didn't actually have your shit together.
Oh, but they know that.
Tell me more.
It's an illusion to think that you can fool anyone. Everybody knows everything about. No, they don't know everything about you. They probably don't even think about you too much. Most people don't think about other people too much. But it's a very interesting, elaborate illusion. We think that we can fool the people that we love. When my mom, we have this very interesting relationship with my mom. Sometimes she gets upset with me, but she is, a little bit old school, so she wouldn't say that because she thinks I have to figure it out. How we speak in hints to each other. So we have these experiences sometimes that I would ask her, "Why are you upset?" She's like, "I'm not upset." I'm like, "Why upset? I can tell you upset." She's, "No, I haven't said anything. Why do you think I'm upset?" I'm like, "Because I feel how you breathe." She's like, "Oh, damn you. You always know me." So we think that we can cheat the world. Well, maybe the world is not so important. We actually do care about our loved ones more than anyone else. And usually if we choose to stay in a relationship which is not good for us, we do that for the sake of people that we love, without realizing that they suffer. Our sacrifice is a huge burden for our loved ones to carry. And we very often, we do that to feel better about ourselves. I'm not going to hurt you. That's what motivates us to take choices which are detrimental to us because we think we do it for someone else. That whole idea of altruism is actually very often so upside down and mistreated, and the same as sacrifice. It's a huge burden. Our sacrifices, our love are very often a huge burden. We really should let our loved ones free, and we should ask for that freedom for ourselves to choose.
How do we begin then to transform from the perfect you, or the perfect us, the perfect we? How do we begin to transform from the perfect to the real?
So
from the inauthentic to the authentic?
Nobody is really perfect. If people think they are very delusional, and probably they're not the people who listen to that or who need to hear that. Nothing in nature is perfect. That's how evolution worked. Art is not perfect. The moment it becomes perfect, it becomes handicraft. That's the nature of genius, is imperfection. So we are not perfect. The moment you become perfect, you pretty much are I don't know, organic organism, but not a real human being. So asking for perfection or chasing perfection is such a futile task, and it's such a struggle, and it's not a very pleasant type of life. But then some of us have the perfectionist streak. I'm a perfectionist, forever perfectionist. But the question is not, with my perfectionism, the question is not how do I get rid of it, but how do I learn to tame it? How do I, a friend of mine, he unfortunately, he has passed away already, but his mom used to say, are you going to make it your curse or your blessing? And maybe that's a good starting point. Just look at the things and ask yourself, rather than seeing them as problems, as troubles, as something which makes you so especially different, and that's why you can't follow good advice. Just ask yourself, do you want to make it your curse or your blessing? It's your choice. It's always your choice to make it your curse or your blessing. I think it's such a wonderful thing. But how it all starts, it starts with awareness. That's the basic skill that you need for any kind of change. Yeah. You need to start being aware of what's going on in your head, what's going on in your life, in your environment. And awareness usually opens doors for a lot of things, because you start noticing things, you find the motivation to want to change them. And that's the fundamental skill for any kind of transformation.
Let's love to hear a couple of very specific, the more specific, the better. How might someone begin to learn this process of awareness? What are some hacks or some activities, some habits to build around becoming more self-aware?
So awareness is like a super skill or a habit, a superpower. And the very simple exercise to start with is to set alarms on your phone or whatever it is that you carry with you all the time, 5 to 10. The moment it rings, you remind yourself, and put it at random times, like, I don't know, 4:33 or something like this. And whenever it rings, take a moment of awareness if you can, unless you're like driving and you can't do that at that moment. But take a moment of awareness, which is really simple. You can, if you can, slow down, close your eyes, listen to the sounds, listen to your body. What do you feel? What were you thinking right now? What were you doing? Usually, if I do any trainings, whether it's online trainings or through the book, I actually give twists to this exercise over and over again, because one of the things is to practice this habit of switching on awareness. The other one, which is a little bit more elaborate, is anchoring the habit of awareness to certain situations that you need to pay attention to. So a very simple example would be, if you want to change your eating habits, you would have to anchor your practice of awareness to every time when you are around food. Because this is the triggering situation where you need to bring awareness. I don't talk about nutrition, by the way, just used it as an example. Sure. So that's a very simple practice. I would suggest you do it for about 30 days at least, just so that you have a good variety of situations to be aware about. And a very important aspect about this practice is do it with curiosity rather than judgment. And your goal is not to live perfectly. Your goal is just to notice what's going on. In fact, I will encourage you not to make any changes. Maybe your alarm goes off when you are winding yourself up and going into this destructive pattern of, whatever it is, destructive pattern. Just notice with curiosity and say, wow, that's what I'm doing right now. And that's it. Don't try to change it. You will want to change it after 30 days. And it won't even need an effort.
So true. And there's so many, you give the example of being around food, but these also can be very simple, right? This can be like every time you walk through a doorway, or every time you touch a door handle, or every time you trying to find something that you do, 10 or 20 times a day, for example. I've found, my wife is a meditation and an awareness practitioner, and I started experimenting with this process a number of years ago, and it was mind-boggling to have these alarms go off or these check-in moments throughout your day and just realize how far afield my mind was from the present moment. There was this gap, this massive gap between my ability to be present and, the alarm would go off and I would be solving a problem that I didn't have two years in the future. And like, oh, if this and this and this, and and then the alarm goes off and you're like, how this is so not useful or helpful.
Yeah.
So the question, assuming, you've got some people, some listeners here who are willing to say, okay, I find value in this, or I can see the value in this. How do we then, what's the leap that we take from becoming aware and becoming sort of present and an actual transformation? What's the gap there? Okay, I do this for 30 days. What I notice is that I'm increasingly not present when I'm at work or when I'm with, there are people around me that I, distrust or are not, I'm not there by my choosing. These are my work peers or whatever. What's the gap? Help us close the gap rather between, this awareness practice and actually transforming into the
I'll say the probably unpopular thing, but there is no gap. That's the beauty of the process. There is no gap. And again, which assumption do we go from? Do we go from the assumption that people need to be frightened into growth and transformation? It has to come through punishment. If you don't do that, how in our industry we have those exercises, which is super helpful, by the way. If you keep doing that, picture yourself 5 years from now. How's your life going to be? And then 10 years from now. And that comes from the idea of punishment. You have to punish yourself into change. Because if you don't change, you're going to, suffer and die. But my assumption is that if you build up that relationship with yourself, you will discover that you're a wonderful human being. You're neither lazy nor stupid. When you start noticing things, that's when you will actually start changing them. Even if you practice this, if you do this practice without judgment, if you see that something is wrong or something doesn't work for you, you will naturally stop doing it. Or if you see that you're not doing something, you will naturally start doing new things. But you just need to notice. And that's the beauty of this practice. And a lot of the times people don't give it enough. Maybe I really don't know. I haven't researched it as much because it's only a fundamental skill on the journey that I help people to go through. But I think that there must be some glitch in the system if awareness alone doesn't give you everything that you need to change for the better. In fact, I think it's a superpower. It's like in X-Men, there's Quicksilver who has the super speed, and when he's in his super speed mode, the whole world just slows down, and he can fix it. And then the world goes back into the normal speed. I think that's what awareness gives you. It allows you to dissect life, see the anatomy of it, and decide, am I going to go this way or that way in the process? And very often we rely, and our industry is also built on that, on the idea that you need superpower. Oh, sorry, not superpower. You need willpower. You need willpower, you need discipline, you need certain ways to make yourself do things. Well, I have bad news. Willpower doesn't last, and it doesn't even work too much. It's an exhaustible resource, which not only is exhaustible, but the moment you use up your willpower, let's say on starting a new diet, you're going to suck it up from all the other areas of your life. And you will suddenly discover that you are a little bit more snappy, a little bit less patient, and so on and so on. The only place where I want to use my willpower is patience with myself and with the world. Everything else can work on other fuel. Willpower is not a good fuel for change. A good fuel for change is motivation, obviously. Intrinsic motivation, where you are motivated by the process, not by the results, but by the process. And that comes through awareness.
Let's talk, you bring up the superhero, and there's a great quote. I always love the quotes at the beginning of the chapters that are truly land. And you've got one that I've marked here in my book, the paradox of masks. And I think it has to do a lot with how you how you show up in the world and what you represent as the world, sometimes versus what you truly are. And this this quote goes like this: "You can't wear a mask, Clark. When people see you and can see the things you can do, the power you have, they'll be terrified. They need to be able to look into your eyes, see your face, so that they can see the decency and kindness that's always there, and know they have nothing to be afraid of."
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Well, I think why I love this quote is that it has this core principle that we are actually, humans are actually beautiful.
And this is Martha Kent and Clark Kent
It's from
from
Superman. Yeah.
Superman. Yes.
I actually had to remove a lot of wonderful quotes because getting them cleared with the owners took
Yes.
much longer. So now I'm praying for the second edition of my book so that I get to restore some of the quotes. There have been really beautiful quotes, but
this again, in sharing this, there's a beautiful thing. Again, this is Superman.
yeah.
This is Superman's wife, Clark Kent's wife, Martha Kent. Is like, you have to be who you are. You have to basically show up in the world, and you start to wear this mask, and it's, people aren't going to be able to see you for who you really are, which is not going to be valuable. It's not going to help. It's only going to continue to compound your problems. So let's move this over to our human existence. Go ahead, please.
Human existence. Well, in the more scientific terms, there's such a wonderful author and speaker as Brené Brown, who talks about vulnerability quite a bit and shame. And she popularized that research that there are three components which are needed for people to create strong connections. And these are the courage. From my memory, maybe I'll butcher it a little bit, so bear with me. So one of them is definitely to believe that you're lovable the way you are, to have courage to show the world who you really are. And the third one is probably also about vulnerability. But the point is that for you to create a strong connection, you have to be to be yourself. Because the moment you're not yourself, the connection is not there. And that's the paradox of the mask. We very often try to be someone else so that we are liked. But we can be truly and profoundly liked only when we show up as ourselves. People don't truly and profoundly like masks or roles or costumes or scripts. That's an illusion. And if we talk about research, there's another research which is known to be the world's humanity's longest psychological research on the correlations between happiness and different factors in our life. And the biggest correlation is between happiness and the strength of your connections. So the more you have people who are close to you in your life, the more likely you are to live a happy life. So the ability to remove masks is really crucial if you want to truly enjoy this journey on the planet.
Yeah. And this is, you referenced Dr. Brené Brown, who's a dear friend of ours, been on mine. She's been, I was thinking ours because myself and my wife, Kate, but she's been on the show. Maybe she has the most appearances, maybe 4 times or whatever. And it was a major breakthrough, I think, culturally, when she was able to popularize through research the benefits of vulnerability. And that's really what we're talking about, right? We're using the analog of masks, but mask is just pretending to be someone that we're not. And to actually be your true self is to be vulnerable. So let's, excavate here just a little bit, scratch on this. What are some prompts or some thoughts that you could give someone in order to start to shed some of these masks? We all have them. Do you have any, are there any sort of awareness bits that you could give us to start to shed some of these things or become aware when we put them on so that we can shed them?
I'm going to make a little sharp turn right now.
Okay, well, I'll follow you. Let's go.
First of all, I don't insist that you absolutely need to be vulnerable for authenticity. You need vulnerability to create connections, and I appreciate that that as a very important skill. But my journey, my book and my journey is, or the journey that I hope the people who read my book will have, is about your relationship with yourself. And here, you're only vulnerable towards yourself, and you are definitely vulnerable, because if you're looking for courage, that means that you're vulnerable. But it's not vulnerability in the sense in which we understand, because I know, also having been in this industry, I know a lot of people are not comfortable about that, and that shouldn't be a deal breaker for you to explore your relationship with yourself, because here it's just you and you. The rest of the world can wait. It wasn't part of my study. In fact, I say in my book that I believe that your relationship with the world is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. And at that, I leave your relationship with the world, because I think I'm much more concerned with how honest, how kind you are to yourself. These two things are incredibly important. How honest and how kind you are to yourself. But as I said, I tend to rant, and now I forgot what was the initial question that I was supposed to answer.
No, it's mostly
the masks. The masks.
Yeah.
The sharp turn comes here. It's okay that we wear masks. It's fine. It's part of healthy, emotionally healthy behavior. We have to adjust ourselves to our circumstances. Circumstances change, and we have to behave slightly differently. The problem is, there are two problems. Problem number one, from which the second problem stems, is that we value certain masks over others. In scientific terms, it's called social roles. So we tend to value social roles which are valued by society. Obviously, we personally also value them higher, and we tend to prioritize them over other roles. Very simple example. If I'm a mother and I'm an entrepreneur is valued much higher by society. So when my mother and my entrepreneur is in conflict, at least outwardly, I would prioritize being something which society values higher rather than the other. And I know it's a maybe painful comparison. Another one would be woman leader. And these roles are very often contradictory in their expressions. So that's the first problem, is when we start prioritizing one role over the other. And it will happen. Now, the question is, how do you feel about the role which you do prioritize? And the other question is, do you sometimes forget that you have other social roles? Another, maybe a little bit bizarre example, if you're a celebrity or influencer, and you forget that to some people you're just a brother or a sister or a friend, and you forget to remove that role, or if you're a very successful entrepreneur and you forget that you're a daddy for someone, and you carry this into circumstances where this role is not only inappropriate, it's irrelevant, and maybe even damaging. So this is where the problem is. I have no problems with people wearing masks and changing their social roles, because people who don't do that, they're not very comfortable. No, well, comfortable is a bad word, but they're not very good members of society. They can be very destructive. A lot of, you mentioned narcissists, I think, or maybe I am confusing, but narcissists are the people who are not very comfortable, and they are very anyway, I don't want to go in that direction, but the point is that it's a healthy thing to do. What is not healthy is when you get stuck in one of them.
Mm-hmm. Your avatars don't see eye to eye, I think is how you put it in the book, right? These different aspects of yourself. So how do we then, is it about how do we become better at showing up as who we really are? And how do we not carry the wrong masks into the wrong rooms? How do we not show up for our son or daughter as the boss at work?
Well, a lot of the times when we do that, that's a symptom of our relationship actually being being at a low state. It's complicated, like they say in Facebook. So that's usually a symptom, and I wouldn't want to give to give answers to such questions, because it would be dealing with the symptoms, when in reality you need to come to peace with who you are fully. So what I would like to maybe, and sorry if I'm evading the question a little bit.
No.
I do it deliberately, but I want to say that, authenticity, for me, it's a result of you fixing your relationship with yourself. So it's usually the sign of your healthy relationship. So basically, if you are at peace with yourself, if you're authentic, it's only about you. Authenticity, in my opinion, is a force without direction. The moment you give it direction, it stops being authenticity. You start using it as a mask, as a role, as something to manipulate the world. And I'm not using the word manipulate in a bad sense.
Sure.
So authenticity is just your relationship with yourself and no one else. And that's the key. And the thing is that the moment you remember who you are, or you hear again, or you listen, remember the moment you come to peace with that, you just cannot be someone else. It's like asking emotionally healthy person to jump off the building. You won't do that. It's just contrary to what you are. So the moment you remember who you are, what your values are, what your unique value is, being something else is going to feel like a betrayal. And you can do it in small doses, but then you will need time to heal again. So I believe that the man who remembers that he's not just entrepreneur, and when he remembers the value of him as a human being, as a soul, I think that person won't be able to be next to their family, to the people who love them, and not be just present.
Personal question. What made you write the book?
I believe that I'm a writer, and I just never realized that, because I always wrote things. And writers write. That's the form of self-expression. I also studied art when I was a kid. So, when you have an art, you're compelled to do that. So writing is my thing. And nothing ever happens with just one thing working in that direction. Another reason is having been in this industry for 20 years, and I'm the person who's always in my head, having witnessed it. And I have this funny way of computational thinking, I think it's called. So a message kind of evolved as a result of my experience. And it's like with pregnancy, once the baby is ready, you can't hold it in, you have to deliver it. So that was another reason. And the third one is very prosaic, COVID, and I had a lot of time on my hands.
I want to say thank you for showing up and taking this. This is very murky territory for so many people, myself included. The journey inward is complex and fascinating, and your consistent framing and reframing of just approaching this with curiosity is very refreshing in this field. You keep talking about the industry, and I'm presuming you're talking about sort of the personal transformation, personal growth industry. But I do think that approaching this journey, as I'm thinking about the people who are listening right now, or for whom this material may be new, a desire, a willingness, an openness to be curious rather than judgmental, as you've said 2 or 3 times here. It's very present in your work, and I think it's one of the attributes of doing this work that has been largely misunderstood. There's so much judgment around self-judgment, for example, like, why am I doing this journey? What, I'm a terrible person, or I'm perfect. It tends to be super polarizing, but it seems like everywhere in your work is a curiosity. Like, you close the book with a story of revealing to your mother. I was very touched by this story, revealing to your mother that you and your husband were going to split. And when you shared this with her, you shared in the book that she basically blew up. She got super mad and was ranting. And that from some part of you was able in that moment to park the idea of scrapping it out right now, of telling her all the reasons that her judgment was not the right judgment, and that, you know, your decision was made. You just chose not to basically lock horns with her. And it's just a really beautiful piece of the book. And I'm wondering, is that sort of the is that the bow that living through difficult things gets you? Does it get you that distance between feeling something, seeing something, experiencing something, and reacting? Is that the real benefit of this work, of being curious about it? Like you talk about this, I'm going to describe it like you're watching your mom. I think it was visual. You're watching your mom get angry. You can see her. You joked earlier about hearing her breathing, and but there's just such a poetry. And then of course you go on to say, cool, then we took some time, and then your mom actually called you, and you guys had a heartfelt, earnest, just beautiful conversation about the tough life decision that you had just made. So at the end of our days, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, this experience was very important in my life, for sure. My mom taught me a very deep, profound lesson, and it's a hard one. It's a very deep philosophical concept, and I believe that if we just touch it on the surface right now, it might not be fair to that concept. But the concept is that everybody has the right to their journey, including the people that we love. And sometimes we have to let them do that journey. And our journey is to witness them doing it, and sometimes disagreeing. Like in the case with my mom and me, none of us could agree with each other's, you know, I couldn't agree with her reaction. She couldn't agree with my choice. But ultimately, philosophically speaking, we have to have enough trust, not just in ourselves, but in people that we love, that they're doing whatever they're doing. And maybe you disagree with that. The best thing I can do for the people that I love is be always there for them. You know, keep my light on for them. And that's a very important concept for me to follow in my life and in my relationships. It has made a lot of things easier, but it took time to take root, especially with my ex-husband. You know how we are so tempted to fix our partners. But the moment when we parted, and I started more and more reminding myself that it's just his journey, and even if I disagree, the only thing I can do for him is have his back. And that really helps me through a lot of things. And sometimes I just have to be accepting with certain things. Yeah, I would have preferred him doing something else, or my children doing something else, or my parents doing something else. But who am I to judge what's best for them? And that's again, I don't want to stage. I mean, we are going to stage us on the surface, but let it be a cliffhanger, guys. Maybe some other time we'll talk about that. But the bow that you were talking about, this actually comes through the work of a few contemporary authors. Brené Brown, one of them. Susan David is another one that I really love. So it's the idea of the space between your emotions and your decisions and your choices. And I think it's very important to understand, in our society, we very often judge emotions, but rather than judging emotions, we should let them be. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And just to remind ourselves that our actions don't need to be based on our emotions. They can be based in our values. So for example, I get really angry, but rather than reacting out of this intense emotion, I can take a breath, maybe employ curiosity and wonder, wow, I wonder why I'm feeling like that. Do I even know the whole story? You know, I can ask a whole lot of questions. I'm good at asking questions, but that gives me that pause to finally ask the important question: how do I choose to act in this situation? And usually my choice is not to act out of my intense emotion, because emotions change, but out of my values and out of what makes me me. This is the basis for as much as I can do that. I'm imperfect. I mean, we are always work in progress. So I have my share of, I'm so sorry, I was wrong.
Well, this is the blend of the words awesome and flawed, right? Flawesome. And the book is Becoming Flawesome, The Key to Living an Imperfectly authentic life. I want to say thank you so much for being a guest on our show. As you said, the cliffhanger is to pick up the book. It's out now. By the time this drops, you will be able to get this wherever books are sold. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Is there anywhere else that you would direct our listeners for the work that you do in the world beyond just the book, which I just shared there?
Oh, I do a lot of stuff, and I have a full spectrum of things happening in my life. I have sheep, for example. But that aside, Kristina Mänd, I'm on all social media as Kristina Mänd. Instagram is my preferred place, but I'm also in all the other places. And it's Kristina with a K because I'm Estonian.
Love it. Love it. KRISTINAMAND. Thank you so much again for being a guest on the show and sharing your journey and this wonderful work that you've put in there. It's such a lovely, it's an assembly of so many different aspects that have been popular on the show for a long time. You've done just a beautiful job of sewing them together for us. Thank you for being on the show. And until next time, from Kristina and myself, we wish you an amazing day, a lovely week. And until next time, we both bid you adieu.